BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. The Chancellor commits to building 300,000 homes every year, but what does that mean for rural communities and farming?
I think we've got to think very carefully about how we deliver these increases in housing in a way that won't compromise other objectives around nature recovery and food production.
We'll have more on that a little later. First today, the House of Lords Environment Committee is investigating the presence of nitrogen pollution in waterways and the air. Yesterday, it took evidence from the Office for Environmental Protection, a government body set up to ensure compliance with environmental laws. The OEP cannot fine those who break the rules. Lord Rooker, a former Labour MP and former Defra minister, asked if that meant no one was scared of them. OEP Chair Dame Glenys Stacey told the panel they'd made 16 successful interventions and many others were active. Natalie Prosser, the organisation's CEO, said an investigation into pollution from combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, which involved Ofwat, Defra and the Environment Agency, was still ongoing, but it was already proving effective.
We may not have the powers of a supranational organisation, but we are very nimble and we can have really good constructive conversations to get solutions on the table. So I can't anticipate which of those two outcomes will be on the CSOs, but I mean the public authorities in question have already taken steps. So, for example, the guidance that Defra issued on standards regulation of CSOs, that's already out for consultation on revising that and improving it. And we've already seen those public authorities working together to further clarify their respective roles and responsibilities transparently. Now, they're already getting on with addressing some of the shortcomings.
So one way or another, we're making a material difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
OEP Chair Dame Glenys Stacey there. They were then asked about the farming rules for water, which are the regulations which aim to stop farmers causing pollution to waterways from fields and slurry. An investigation by the OEP, which started last November, showed that Defra had given advice to farmers which was inconsistent with the rules. Natalie Prosser explained how the case had progressed.
The guidance issued by Defra to the Environment Agency was inconsistent with the farming rules for water, and that if farmers subsequently relied on that guidance, that would bring them into breach with the regulations themselves. So that's the purpose of the investigation. We've issued an information notice, which in layman's terms is our statement of where we think the government may have broken the law. It's a procedural step that we need to take. Now, we're in ongoing dialogue with Defra. They're very alive to the issue, and we would like to see that guidance revised, and that's where I'm going to leave it at the moment.
Natalie Prosser, CEO of the Office for Environmental Protection. Now, all week we're looking at eggs, and sales are rising. Supplying the egg producers are the pullet rearers, the farms which take day-old chicks and grow them for 16 weeks before they then move on to laying farms. Noble Foods is one of the largest rearers, producing 4 million birds a year. They supply 250 producers with RSPCA-assured birds. Sarah Falkingham went to see one of their farms near Mansfield on the Nottinghamshire-Lincolnshire border.
Left foot first.
Well, the very first thing with bird flu biosecurity is I am double wrapping my Wellington boots. So I'm walking into this very warm shed with Jean-Paul Michalski, who's in charge of all the rearing of pullets and production for Noble Foods.
So this shed is around 60 metres long, around 20 metres wide. This unit, when it's fully stocked, can take up to around 35,000 birds in total. It's got what is probably the state-of-the-art rearing system at the moment, which is a multi-tiered rearing system, like a huge climbing frame for chickens. The birds are currently contained within that system, and this is what we do up until around 14 days of age. So in the next couple of days we'll be opening this up, and then the birds will have full access to this whole unit and be able to get down onto the floor.
So they're about 4 inches high, still fluffy yellow. What colour are they going to be when they're fully grown?
These are actually a flock of white birds. So these are white birds which will produce a white egg. These birds can be more productive, eat less food. So there's some real benefits around white egg from a sustainability perspective as well. The birds have a capacity to lay slightly longer laying cycles as well. I'm sure customers will see more white egg on the shelves going forward.
And then they will, once they've got the strength, the wire comes down, they can jump down onto this sawdust here, they can go up down these wire little ramps to increase their leg strength, and then they can fly up to wherever the perches are, because they're going off into other systems, aren't they, where they're all multi-tiered and different heights?
Yeah, so with RSPCA assured, we have to ensure that we rear birds on a system that is very similar to the one that they're going to. So if you think about being at university, if you were living in one big room, what we're trying to do is differentiate activity. So if you were at halls and you all lived in one room, someone wanted to have a party, someone wanted to sleep, someone wanted to do their homework, in a system where they're all on the floor, that interaction causes stress. So what we do on this system is we give them options, so they can go to the top to sleep, into the system to feed and drink, and they can go on the floor to play around and scratch. And that's why this is a high welfare system, because it's differentiating that activity.
Now, before they've arrived here as day-old chicks, obviously the male 50% or whatever never made it. They were gassed. Are there any other alternatives to that?
Yeah, I think, look, things have moved really fast in that field at the moment, and there's a huge amount of technology that is moving very quickly. I think the reality is at the moment to adopt some of the systems that are in place to allow us to select male chicks are not quite at the point we need them to be. Some of the technologies still mean that we have to set eggs and obviously destroy eggs at certain times during that incubation period. We will get there, but at the moment I don't think the technologies are quite at the point they need to be to allow us to adopt it in a way that will not actually add more complication.
When people buy free-range eggs, will the pullet have been free-range? And if not, why can't it be?
Not the pullet. So like I said, we have these birds from day old to 16 weeks, so you couldn't rear in a free-range system. These birds need to be kept at 35 degrees at housing, and we reduce that temperature around 0.5 degree a day up to around 5 or 6 weeks. Obviously, these birds are going to a free-range system, so they're going to spend the rest of their life out in the field. But our focus is getting that real good development and growth and a really good quality pullet, which will go on and produce lots of eggs and stay healthy and maintain itself.
And what happens to all the waste? Because obviously there's going to be quite a lot of litter from a site this big.
There is, and again, huge sort of focus on that within the industry, but this is a very valuable product. Depending on the part of the country we're in Lincolnshire at the moment, so there's a huge demand and it's fantastic. Local farmers really love it, and it can be dealt with and spread at rates which is really controllable now with all the modern technology. In other areas where it's more difficult, a lot of that will go into digesters and it also into power stations to produce electricity.
That report from Sarah Falkingham. The spring statement by the Chancellor has drawn a mixed reaction from the rural community. Farming itself wasn't mentioned as such, but plans to build more homes were highlighted by Rachel Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, the planning system that we inherited was far too slow. The OBR have concluded that our reforms will lead to house building reaching a 40-year high. 305,000 homes a year by the end of the forecast period. And changes to the National Planning Policy Framework alone will help build over 1.3 million homes in the UK over the next 5 years.
Well, the estates agents body, Property Mark, said planning reforms were encouraging but warned workforce challenges remain, and it's vital that local councils have the resources required to deliver effective planning and infrastructure. And that might be difficult because the County Council's network have pointed out the government's fair funding review is likely to direct funding to urban and city areas at the expense of counties. This is despite county areas facing extreme demand-led pressures alongside the additional costs of delivering services in rural places. As I said, farming didn't come up until the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, mentioned it in his long list of criticisms of Rachel Reeves.
She is the Chancellor who said she would not increase borrowing, but she did. She said she wouldn't change her fiscal rules, but she did. She said she wouldn't put up national insurance, but she did. She said she wouldn't cut winter fuel payment, but she did. She said she wouldn't tax farmers, but she did. And she said she would not move to more than one fiscal event a year, and she just has. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises.
That was Mel Stride in the House of Commons. Guy Garrett is Professor of Environmental and Rural Studies at the University of Newcastle's Centre for Rural Economy. He gave me his assessment of the statement.
There was nothing new for agriculture in today's speech.
She did talk about the increase to the minimum wage, which is going up by 6.7% from April. That's next week. What impact do you think that might have?
It's going to make employers' costs considerably higher. It will maybe have at least a medium-term effect of making our food and agriculture sectors less competitive compared to some of their overseas rivals. Farmers who are struggling to cover their costs will find that even harder.
There was also talk about budgets in government departments. The Chancellor reiterated the day-to-day spending in departments would be fully protected. So that means the 2025 farming budget for England remains unchanged at £2.4 billion. However, she did mention the government spending review in June, when the government will set out new department budgets. Is there a worry around that?
This is something that the industry is certainly finding very concerning, that the government might start to slash Defra's budget. We might see the need for increased spending cuts, and Defra has traditionally been a bit of a soft target for that sort of activity.
On the other side, and the Chancellor mentioning growth, building more houses, but that's another pressure, isn't it, on the countryside?
It is. I mean, inevitably, a lot of that pressure is going to come on agricultural land. Potentially, local councils could compulsorily purchase that land from farmers just at cost price, ignoring the hope value that would normally be added onto that.
Then again, if you're building on grey belt areas or even green belt areas, doesn't that boost the rural economy?
Potentially, it may provide new markets for some on-farm enterprises. I think we've got to think very carefully about how we deliver these increases in housing in a way that won't compromise other objectives around nature recovery and food production.
Farming was specifically mentioned, but it was by the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. He talked about taxing farmers in his speech, but the Chancellor made no specific reference to the changes to inheritance tax introduced back in October. It seems to be that is not under consideration.
No, I mean, from reading between the lines, this never seemed likely to be a possibility.
Where does it leave us, do you think, in rural economies?
In a situation of considerable ongoing uncertainty. We've got the consultation at the moment around the land use framework. We've had the blow around the early withdrawal of SFI as well. There are lots of people in the industry who are going to feel that the government is not playing fair with farming. And I think some level of certainty and stability for the industry would be very welcome, but things could easily change in 6 months or a year's time, and more likely for the worse than for the better.
Professor Guy Garrett there. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.